So my name is Jay Harman, and I'm the CEO of PAC Scientific, which is a biomimetic research company in California. And I grew up beside the beach in Australia, and I was really fascinated with boats and trying to design boats that were more streamlined. And I also became a captain of seagoing vessels, and I did thousands of miles of ocean travel around Australia doing research programs on islands and in territories that hadn't been really explored before. And these boats did 10 miles an hour. And I can tell you, if you've got to go 2,000 miles at 10 miles an hour, it gets a little boring. So I was really interested in what are the limitations with boats? How can we make boats better? Well, as a kid, I noticed that seaweeds are really quite fragile. If you grab hold of a seaweed, you can break it off pretty easily, and yet even in the wildest storms, with the biggest waves, these seaweeds do just fine. So what's going on there? And anyway, I spent a lot of time in the water, and I observed, and it all looked like chaotic flow, but over a little time, I realized that all of these weeds were changing their shape to the path of least resistance. And it turns out that that shape is actually the same shape as the whirlpool in your bathtub when you pull the plug. So, interesting thing. Nature never uses a straight line to move anything. It always follows the path of least resistance. It always uses the least amount of energy and the least amount of materials to get the job done. And we can see these spiraling shapes in all movement. Now, we live in a turbulent universe. Any physicist will say that all movement is turbulent. Everything is turbulent, right? So humans actually mostly try to suppress turbulence because we think that's what actually consumes a lot of our energy, right? Nature exploits turbulence. So we see it in whirlpools, in the growth of every living thing, in the way that heat moves, in galaxies and particle decay. And we can see it in our human bodies, incredibly efficient systems we have here. Human cardiovascular system, the heart muscle, is in the shape of a whirlpool, and it pumps blood through 60,000 miles of whirlpool-shaped arteries, not a single straight line, and yet far, far more efficient than any pumping system that humans have ever developed. And over on the right, well, we can see 60,000 miles. Down on the down lower right is the cochlea of our ear. This is how we hear as well. And in the center is a seashell, looks exactly the same. And here is an electron microscope photograph of a human skin pore. It's how we perspire. It's nature's refrigerator. And people have seen this shape since the dawn of time, since people first thought a thought, and it became the most common icon through all religions to explain the mystery of life and creativity and also, the next slide, and it was used as the model for pretty much everything we did in pre-industrial world. We used it to design our weaving and our pottery and our boats and our art in the Renaissance. All realism in art is based on, if you like, to take a cross-section of a whirlpool, you end up with that spiral, which is the equiangular spiral. And all realism is based on that equiangular spiral. So it's an interesting thing. This is what nature does, and it actually doesn't do anything else. It only does this shape. But I learned in school, of course, that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So if you want to use the least energy, getting from this side of the room to that side of the room, you have to go in a straight line. Makes perfect sense, and our entire industrial world is built on that premise. And yet nature, in every case, is much more efficient. So I couldn't reconcile that difference. Anyway, I joined the Fisheries and Wildlife Department and spent quite a few years at sea, and I was studying more and more this ubiquity of these shapes in nature. I couldn't find a single example of where nature did anything that wasn't this way. So, and the other thing is that nature's clean, green, and sustainable. And it became very apparent to me, this is in the 60s and 70s already, that the world was facing some very difficult challenges in terms of environmental quality. So I thought, well, I'll leave the public service, and I'd already worked on designs around these whirlpools to make more streamlined shapes in boat hulls that I was designing at the time. But I thought, what if I froze a whirlpool? Could I actually capture those streamlines? It's very, from a mathematics point of view, it's very difficult to define what a vortex is because it's an unsteady state. Everything's always moving and changing all the time. But anyway, I was able to cobble together really the streamlines of a vortex, and this is actually from animal parts and seashells, etc. And it actually matched a whole lot of flow conditions that I compared it to. And so I made this thing, and I thought, well, I'll rotate it in the bathtub, and it's obviously going to pump, right? It's going to be interesting. So I put it in the bathtub. It didn't work. It actually did very little at all. And my wife was there at the same time, and she said, why don't you rotate it the other way? And I thought, well, that was counterintuitive, but I did. And it actually worked. And it showed remarkable counterintuitive efficiencies for moving fluids. So this was really something, and much higher efficiencies than anything else. So we made some propellers and some prototype fans and things to move fluids around. We were getting great results. So we wrote to Fortune 500 companies, a whole bunch of them, and got a whole lot of interviews. And we had a theory, but we discovered we couldn't sell a theory. And so we went back to the drawing board and decided we had to actually make a product and show that this would translate into something worthwhile commercially. So here is the world's first industrialized frozen whirlpool. This matches the streamlines of the whirlpool in your bathtub. And this is the actual size of a device that we made to circulate the water in these water tanks. Now, the public water of the utility services, of course, keep water in these, and they're up to 10 million gallons in size. This one's about 2 million gallons. Sun's beating on the top, it heats up the water. We've got disinfectant chemicals in there that quite often result in nitrates. So you've got hot water and nitrates, algal blooms, not good. Bottom water is cold. So we thought, well, if we circulated this water, that could help the situation. So we went to some municipalities and we said, let's put one of these in your tanks. And they said, yeah, right, you're smoking the wrong stuff. How could something this small have an effect on something that big? And by the way, you see that this looks like the X-ray of a lily from the garden because every living thing is built to the geometry of vortical flow. Every part of every living thing. So anyway, the city of Redwood in California let us put it in a tank. Tiny little thing, 3 feet high, that size impeller, 300 watts of power, 1,200 revs. Right? It worked incredibly well. So now this is installed in more than 1,300 of these facilities across the United States, Australia, and Asia. Tanks up to 10 million gallons. So that's a football field, 30 feet deep. Imagine that, this tiny little thing. And it saves municipalities 85% of their power and 85% of the disinfectants that they're putting into this water. So this is a quantum leap in solving this problem. So another application, if we think about, well, PAX then went on and used this approach to all manner of things from turbines and pumps and everything else. Once you have this, you can get all sorts of shapes that actually use the same principle. Fans, for instance, air-moving fans. How much energy do air-moving fans use in the world each year, each day? Well, it turns out 22% of all of our electrical energy goes into moving air with fans. This is the world's best fan for cooling servers in the computer industry and server farms. That is the best, and that's the result of 50 years of evolution. We created a fan that doesn't look much different, but it's based on this principle. 47% less energy. This is dramatic. So if you can save nearly half the energy put into fans, you're saving 10% of the world's energy just by changing over to fans. So it doesn't stop there. It goes into all sorts of applications. This is a new discipline. It's called biomimicry. Well, actually, humans have been doing this since time began, but as a science, it's become a really important focus in the last 10 years. And now there's about 100,000 initiatives happening around the world to look at how nature can inspire us to solve pretty much any problem that humans are facing. And after decades of work, we're finding actually it's exploding right now. It's becoming part of the vernacular. There are all sorts of publications and movies, and that book over there on the right, The Shark's Paintbrush, that's a book on biomimicry that we created for educating students about biomimicry. It's got 100 different case studies in it. All the profits go to education. So the potential for having a satisfying career for young people today is phenomenal. There's never been a time in history where there is so much opportunity. So we can reinvent this world, and the younger generations coming up have these extraordinary opportunities. I'm very excited about the future and where we can go. We can reinvent ourselves. Thank you very much.